All right, good morning. I told you guys that we would be virtual today, and so today we're going to take a look at really Spanish America, the beginnings really of the Spanish Empire here in America, which is a big deal because it sets the stage for what's going to happen next. We have to deal with the Spanish. We're more concerned about what's going to happen a little bit later on when the English arrive, but the Spanish, in a lot of ways, are going to set the precedent for what happens next. Last time we talked a little bit about why the Europeans are starting to explore. And this process begins really after the Crusades end. The Renaissance begins in Europe. Okay, your book talks about the Renaissance, so you should be familiar with what the Renaissance is. This rebirth in Europe that helps states recover from the Middle Ages, begin to develop more as political states. Kings return, powerful kings return. All of them are interested in becoming more powerful, becoming more wealthy. And so some of the motives for really the beginning of European exploration are some of these things we've already talked about. Okay, the Crusades had taught the Europeans, many of them, that there were goods to be had and wealth to be made. Okay, the Renaissance had given them a little bit of knowledge about what was out there, and more importantly, how they could get to some of these areas. And we'll talk a little bit about we're going to save the Reformation a little bit for a little bit later on when we talk about the English. But the religious reformation that's going on in Europe, which is also talked about in your textbook, is going on. And some people who are very unhappy with what's going on in Europe will leave looking for other places. Or you have missionary activity that's going on. All of those things. Sometimes in the old days, we used to call some of these motivations God, gold, and guns. Okay, military conquest, all right, wealth, and of course missionary activity. These monarchs, these new monarchs in Europe, are seeking a lot of new wealth. They want to become more powerful. And so if they could get to China, if they could get to Asia, if they could get to India, and they could get some of these things for themselves without having to go through the Islamic world and without having to go through the Italians, they could become very wealthy very fast. And some technology is going to help them as well. A lot of that coming out of knowledge shared during the Renaissance. So the Europeans are in as they start to recover from the Middle Ages, they are in a prime position to begin to explore, and that's what they began to do. Okay, the first to really do so are the two states on the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. The Spanish and the Portuguese are poised really to because they border seas, because they organize and develop and unify a little bit earlier than other parts of Europe. They're the ones that begin to develop first, and those are the ones that we take a look at. A lot of the Portuguese development and perhaps even the lead for the Portuguese in exploration is this guy's responsibility, Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry, part of the royal family, would establish a school for sailors, a school for really for navigation, and teach many of the Portuguese sailors about some of these new technologies. They would revolutionize the way that they navigated. They would revolutionize really even their boats, their weapons, and other things. And so some of these Portuguese advances that we're talking about include sailing devices like the astrolabe, which helps you navigate really and navigate by night using the stars. All right, better maps. Okay, sextants. All right, to help you navigate. Okay, compasses tell you where you're going, which direction you're going. Okay, all those things are important. All of them are pretty new as you got into the late 1400s and early 1500s. Okay, the Portuguese have better sailing vessels. That's the Portuguese caravel that you see up there. Okay, very mobile, very maneuverable, very fast. Okay, they were rigged where they could be very maneuverable when they were up close to land. or that when you could throw up square sails, they could move very quickly in open water. So by this time, you also have firearms, cannons, so they could arm themselves and protect themselves, which made them very, all right, when you really kind of think about it, they are, I mean, this is some of the top of the line weaponry in the world at this time. And so, they're like the modern day equivalent of a battleship almost. So the Portuguese take an early lead in some of the technology and in some of the weaponry. They are trying to get to Asia, and their solution is to sail south. They are going to explore the west coast of Africa and then move south along the African coast. Now, some of the explorers that are important, Bartolome Diaz will make it all the way to the southern tip of Africa before turning back. Vasco da Gama will make it around Africa and to India. Da Gama's voyage is really one of the first to make it to Asia, make it to India, and then return. Okay. Now, notice that doesn't happen until 1498. That's 6 years after Columbus's voyage to America. But Columbus whacks himself into America, which is not where he's supposed to be. Columbus had promised the Spanish monarchs that he would get to Asia. Da Gama makes it. So 1498 is a big deal. Okay. So let's take a look at what I'm telling you here. Okay. So the Portuguese, if you follow these yellow lines, they skirt the coast of Africa here, make it all the way down to the southern tip to the Cape of Good Hope. That's really Diaz. And then later, Da Gama will make it all the way around to here and then all the way to Calicut here in India. Okay. And then from later on, the Portuguese will even begin to push out this way and expand out this way as well. Now, Da Gama will turn around and bring his cargo back to Portugal, and it is fantastically profitable. So this is what they're after. This is what the European monarchs are after. They want to get over here to get these goods, bring them back to Europe, distribute them in Europe, and make huge profits. The other way that is there is the way that the Italians had made money. Okay, contact here with the Islamic world, and then the overland trade that the Islamic world had created between China and India, and that's expensive. So if you can cut these guys out, if you can cut the Islamic world out, you can cut even the Italians out, your profit margin goes way up. Now, because we have to deal with the Spanish here, have to deal with Columbus, okay? And you guys Columbus is a very controversial figure and still remains a very controversial figure, especially among modern historians. Many modern views about Columbus see him, of course, as an imperialist. They see him as a conqueror. They see him as a murderer because Columbus's voyage brings disease to the New World. You guys are all participating in a discussion about the Columbian Exchange, and we'll talk a little bit about the Columbian Exchange a little bit later on. But really, Columbus's voyage opens up a Pandora's box that allows the Europeans access to North America and South America eventually, and will wipe out many of the native civilizations here due to disease or due to his access, I guess, to the New World will bring even more conquest and even more death. Columbus was born in 1451 near Genoa, and that's in Italy. Genoa is an Italian city. So he's Genoese. He's not Spanish, but he has an early interest in exploration and will make it all the way to Portugal by 1476. He is trying to convince some of the monarchs of Europe that he has a different idea, that he can sail west around the globe and end up in India and China. Now, at that time, that seemed almost ludicrous. Okay, but the Columbus had really worked with other geographers. Columbus had believed, or really believed, that this was possible. Okay, and so he believes that he can do this. Columbus's biggest problem, well, there are two real big problems. Number one, he underestimated the size of the Earth. And number two, he doesn't really realize that he can't get through North and South America. We believe, or we kind of have this concept sometimes that North America and South America were just this unknown area. And that's not exactly true. The Vikings had made it here much earlier. Okay, so Viking exploration in North America dates all the way back to really the 800s, 900s or so. Okay, Eric the Red, the Viking explorer, had made it to Greenland in the late 900s, I think. Okay, so Leif Erikson had made it to the North American coast by about 1000 or so AD. So other Europeans had made it here. It just wasn't really known all that well. So Columbus is in some ways sort of shooting in the dark. And I think he always believed that even if he did run into something, that he could find a way through, which there's not. So Columbus will kind of manage to sail his way over here, and he ends up whacking himself into Hispaniola and today modern day Cuba. So 1492, he ends up down here. 1493, the same place. He makes 4 voyages here to America, and kind of explores this whole region right here around the Caribbean. All right, the Caribbean Sea. So the Columbus really, we view Columbus as the discoverer of America, which isn't really true. We also view him as this person who sometimes you can get really off base here. And you think that Columbus sets off from Spain to discover America. And that's not true. Remember where he was supposed to be. What does he call the people that he runs into? Indians, because he's supposed to be in India. So he thinks he's there. He's not. So Columbus really, and he causes, for the Spanish at least, more problems probably than they were expecting. Ferdinand and Isabella, the king and queen of Spain, had invested really in a get-rich-quick scheme. They felt like if Columbus could make his way to India, into China, and return, they would get wealthy fast. They would beat the Portuguese, and everything would be great. This was a really get rich quick scheme for them. Okay, now that doesn't work out. They don't know what they have. What does Columbus really? What has he found? And the answer is they don't know. And so, if you don't know what you found, you've got 2 choices: abandon it and try another way, or to explore it and figure out what's out there. And the Spanish are going to explore. The next real phase here is exploration. And because of that, they're going to have to invest more money, more manpower into what Columbus has found. Okay. So it becomes pretty clear, though, that whatever Columbus has found is not Asia. Okay. So, and pretty soon after this, others began to whack themselves into North and South America as well. Pedro Cabral, a Portuguese explorer, will get blown off course. And I'm going to go back to the map over here a second real quick. Cabral will get blown off course here. He takes too wide of a turn around Africa. He's trying to kind of skirt Africa, but he takes too wide of a turn and ends up whacking himself into Brazil. Now, Cabral set out to really trying to do what others had done. But when he discovers Brazil, of course, he hops out and lays claim to this for the Portuguese. This gives the Portuguese a foothold here in South America. Okay, the one that is going to become a massive foothold later on. The Portuguese will lay claim to Brazil, and Brazil becomes a Portuguese colony. Today, if you go to Brazil, everybody thinks that, when you get into Central and South America, that everybody speaks Spanish because of the massive Spanish influence and the massive Spanish colonies that were established here. And that's great, and that applies to a lot of places, except Brazil, because if you go to Brazil, what do you speak? Portuguese. Okay, so the other voyages that follow Columbus, they know something is out here. Okay, shortly after Columbus's voyage, it's going to lead to a problem. The Pope does not want Spain and Portugal going to war over things here, all right, over trade routes here into the Americas. And so essentially what you'll see later on, and I'll show you this later on, but what you eventually sort of see later on is a treaty. And it is called the Treaty of Tordesillas. And essentially what the Pope does is draw a line about right here, okay? And what he basically says is that Portugal gets this and these routes, okay? And Spain gets these, okay? But notice Brazil is still included in the Portuguese side, okay? Now, what happens after Columbus, okay, is, and I told you guys, that eventually you're going to see the whole world open up, okay? In the early 16th century, the early 1500s, Ferdinand Magellan will leave Spain, sail all the way around here. Okay, Magellan is actually killed over here in the islands off the coast of Asia here, and his crew will actually finish the circumnavigation and end up back over here. So now it's proven that you can sail around the world. There is, unfortunately, though, even though a lot of people are trying to find it, there is no passage through North or South America that would make this journey shorter. So the only way to get there is to go all the way around South America like that. Of course, today there's a canal right here, okay, a modern day canal here in Panama that allows ships to coming this way or coming this way to navigate through the canal, and it cuts off having to sail all the way around South America. What happens after this is a wave of European explorations. Once the Spanish and the Portuguese have really started to explore these areas, what you see next is this wave of exploration. The Dutch, the English, the French, and the Spanish will all eventually get involved. Now, we are interested in these red lines here, okay, because it's the Spanish, and I told you guys that we're interested in that right now. But we'll come back and talk about some of these earlier, or some of these other groups coming out of Europe as well. But for right now, we're kind of interested in these red lines, okay? And we've got Columbus here, all right, Columbus's voyage. But over here, you start to see some of the other voyages of exploration and some of the other efforts by the Spanish to explore, to figure out what they have. Okay, remember I told you that's the next step. They've discovered this. Now the only real option, if they want to remain here, is to figure out what they have. So you'll see explorers like Ponce de Leon here, who explores Florida. And of course, while he's there, is looking for the Fountain of Youth, this mythical thing that he hears about that would grant you eternal life. Hernando de Soto, the explorer that explores most of the American Southeast. He comes out of Cuba through Florida into parts of Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Is the first explorer to reach the Mississippi River. He makes it all the way out into Arkansas and areas here before his voyage will turn back. DeSoto actually gets sick and dies here in the New World of a fever, and from most accounts is buried in the river. If you look down here or over here, you see Coronado. Francisco Coronado will explore most of the American Southwest out in this area. Okay, he hears tale of the legendary four cities of gold, and so he's out exploring through here, looking for the cities of gold. You have other explorers out here, Cabrillo, Nate, all right, but you have Balboa here, who is the first to see the Pacific. But there are a couple that we need to kind of key in on, okay? And there are two. One is Cortez. And everybody, I hope you can see Cortez right here. And the other one is Pizarro right down here, okay? These two are a big deal because Cortez is going to be responsible, and you can kind of follow the line here, for conquering one of the major Native American civilizations, the Aztecs, okay? So he is going to push his way in here and conquer the Aztecs. Pizarro, a few years later, is going to push his way into South America and conquer the Inca. Okay, so the Inca Empire down here. The two major Native American civilizations that are in place when the Europeans began to explore. So exploration, especially for the Spanish, now turns to conquest. These two, the Aztecs and the Inca, are very organized states, and they have the potential for disrupting the Spanish move here into the New World. They also have resources that the Spanish would like. And so Cortez and Pizarro are going to turn their attention to conquest. Cortez's conquest of the Aztecs is one of these great examples of the technological difference between the Europeans and Native American societies and civilizations here. You have a tremendous technological difference. You have also the effects of the Columbian Exchange that will play a part of it as well. Your book does a really good job of telling you the story of Cortez and his attack on the Aztecs and eventually the demise of the Aztec king Montezuma. Cortez, remember, is able to, with a lot of help from Native American groups in Central America, because they hated the Aztecs so much. The Aztecs were this very warrior elite society. They conquered their neighbors. They forced the neighbors to do the agricultural work. The Aztecs were essentially overlords and forced these other groups to provide the Aztecs with food. The Aztecs were hated by those people that they enslaved, and so Cortez gets a great advantage by dragging some of them along with him who were eager to fight against the Aztecs. If you if you read the story in the textbook about the conquest, you guys realize that Cortez and his conquistadors, they managed to do something that, with a pretty small number of people, that didn't seem possible. Okay, he has a small army. He has just those Native American forces to help him, and he's going up against an Aztec capital in Tenochtitlan that has 200,000 inhabitants, bigger than many of the cities in Europe. How is he able to win? And if you go and you take a look at why, one of the biggest answers is one, technology, and B, smallpox. So the Aztecs, after they overthrew Montezuma, they tried to hold out in Tenochtitlan while Cortez lay siege to the city. So they starved to death. They had to deal with smallpox. Okay, so Cortez and really a pretty small group of people were able to defeat a much larger empire, thanks in large part to technology and thanks in large part to the ravages of smallpox. And it's going to teach us something. Okay, Pizarro later, when he conquers the Inca, will I'm going to show you some of these pictures as I went through. Okay, there's Pizarro and the Inca leader Atahualpa. It's the same story. All right, Pizarro sort of stumbles upon a group, the Inca, that are they're they're very advanced. They are doing great things. Some of the things that they have built are just remarkable. But Pizarro and a very small group of people make their way into basically the Inca homeland, and will end up conquering the Inca because of some poor decisions that the Inca made. This sets up what I told you guys that you should be reading about, and that you should be watching the videos about, that you're going to do your discussion board about, and that's the Columbian Exchange. Okay, it is simply a biological exchange between the old world and the new world. So if you look over here, the old world, the Europeans especially, there's Spain and there's Portugal, all right, will send these things to the new world. In exchange, the new world here will send these things back to Europe. There are some huge things that come from the new world, that are native to the new world, that are indigenous to the new world, that will make their way back to the old world and have a major impact. Okay, tobacco, all right, is one. All right, the tomato is one. Cocoa, which is where we get chocolate from. Okay, those things. The potatoes are huge. Okay, a huge influence on the European diet. And of course, maize, which was native to this area, and that's corn. Okay, but if you look down here, there are a couple of things that come out of the old world that come to the new world that are remarkably important as well. Okay, one, sugar. We'll talk about it. It is huge. Okay, horses, huge. Okay, other crops as well. But you get down here, you see the ones that are down here, and here's the deal: you get these diseases. Okay, disease is one of the biggest factors in the Columbian Exchange. The problem the problem that disease plays in this exchange is that these diseases, whether it be smallpox here, measles, okay, the flu even, okay, can be deadly. And when you get into a population here in the old world that has no resistance to it, then the death toll can be catastrophic. The diseases during these 3 centuries after Columbus's first voyage, these diseases, smallpox, malaria, mumps, okay, tens of millions of people are going to die. Some estimate that and your book talks about this, just within 75 years of Columbus's voyage, 80 to 90% of the Native American population in areas that had been exposed to the Spanish, they were gone. Okay, they were dead. 80 to 90% of the Native Americans were wiped out by disease brought here during the Columbian Exchange. So pay attention to that as you read your video, or excuse me, as you read your text and as you watch those videos for your discussion boards. Okay. The Spanish are really following a cycle here. Okay. This cycle is the cycle that's going to be really followed by most of the Europeans that are going to follow, that are going to try to explore what they have. Okay, so stage one is always exploration. What is it that we have found? Okay, then if necessary, we have to conquer the groups that are already there, whether they have civilization or not. Okay, conquest usually comes next, followed by missionary activity, followed by permanent settlement from whatever country it is coming here to the New World. And by that time, you start to have an official colony. So that's an important step, okay? And remember this, because this is going to be, this cycle is going to be really pretty much for everyone, okay? The steps it takes to get you to an official colony. Okay, you have to explore, you have to conquer, you have to do missionary activity, and you have to then establish permanent settlement. Okay, the Spanish do a great job of exploring these areas, and I already showed you some of the conquistadors that are responsible for moving into these areas. Okay. But for the Spanish, there is a downside to this cycle, okay? There is a downside to what's happening here, okay? And it kind of it does. It sort of comes in all of these stages, okay? But one of the things that the Spanish are going to have problems with, okay? And one of the things that they have to adjust to is what to do with these people that they conquer. Okay, so what do they do with the Native Americans? Okay, so these people that are conquered, what happens to them? Okay, when the Spanish first arrived, they began to start putting into place a system, and I'm gonna write it up here, okay, because it's an important term. Okay, it's the encomienda. Okay, that's an A, sorry. The encomienda is it's a system that allowed the Spanish military guys, okay, officers, people that were high up in the military, to essentially become landowners and control the Native American villages on the land that they were given. It's very similar to feudalism. So let's say I was one of Cortez's lieutenants, okay? And so Cortez, because of my service, decides to give me a piece of this territory that we've conquered. So this becomes mine, okay? And I technically become the Lord, okay? But on this land, there is a Native American village. So I am now responsible for these Native Americans. And there are several things as a landowner that I now become responsible for, okay? Number one, I have to Christianize them. So I have to bring in the church, okay? Number two, I need these Native Americans to make sure that we have enough food to survive. And so I began to use these Native Americans. Not only am I Christianizing them, but I'm also going to use them for labor. And so the encomienda system is essentially really a feudal system. The encomiendero is the landowner. The Native Americans become peasants. And the priests are also important because it's their responsibility to Christianize the Native Americans. And you guys can see what happens here. You end up with a social system that puts the Spanish on top, all right? And that is going to put the Native Americans, the Indians, okay, that were conquered at the bottom, okay? So they are poverty, they are in poverty, they are not, okay? Unfortunately, the Spanish treatment of the Indians is, in several cases, pretty barbaric. Rumors start to fly about how poorly the Spanish are treating the Native Americans. Okay, some of the Native Americans welcomed the beginnings, really, of Christianization. Others don't. Okay, and there is a real problem with this. Many of the times when the Christians would move into these Native American areas, they would not only sort of almost force the Native Americans to convert to Christianity, but oftentimes they destroyed evidence of their old gods and, of course, evidence of their old civilization. Because of that, we have lost a lot of the archaeological evidence of what many of these Native American groups were doing early on. And they, of course, had a lot of this destroyed as a result. The Native Americans are going to, and I want to give you a kind of a preview of something I'm going to talk about later on. Okay, and I might as well go ahead and preview it here because we're going to continue to talk about it. The Native Americans are going to provide really unreliable labor. Now, the Spanish, they don't want to go dig in the dirt. Okay, they are way above that. And so too will be the English later on. So they want other people to do the labor for them. Okay, the Native Americans are going to provide, they're going to provide the labor early on, but they are an unreliable source. Okay, number one, they're dying. Okay, number two, if they could get away, they could. And they had a better chance, since they're in their own homelands, of maybe escaping. But when you have 80 to 90% dying from diseases, that means your labor supply is going to take a dramatic turn for the worse. The Spanish and the Portuguese have already come into contact with another potential labor system, okay, the slave trade. So the Portuguese, remember, had explored much of this area, had made contacts, and actually had begun to trade with these areas. But they also began to supply chiefs with weapons and encouraged them to make war on their neighbors and to bring the captives back to the coast. And this will be the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, especially when places over here in the New World begin to need labor. Okay. If you look here, okay, you guys are going to see that the transatlantic slave trade is going to bring slaves out of this part of Africa, transport them here to the New World. We here in America sometimes think that all of the slaves ended up here in the American South, and that is not true. If you guys notice, only 5% of the Africans exported out of Africa end up here in North America. The bulk of the African slave trade takes slaves either here to the colonies in the West Indies or here to Brazil. Okay. So when you look at this, almost 95% of the slaves exported out of Africa either end up here in the West Indies or here in Brazil. These two share something in common. Early on, the major crop that's being produced in these areas is sugar. So many of the early slave trade, or much of the early slave trade, all right, was part of the sugar trade. The transatlantic slave trade is designed to take a group of people, move them here for labor purposes, and it is a brutal system. Sugar production is brutal. Okay, it happens in tropical environments. Slaves have a very difficult time. The labor is very intensive. Disease is rampant. So there is a constant need for labor in these massive sugar producing areas. And so the Europeans will refine the system. They will bring guns and other trading materials into Africa, have the African chiefs make war on other African chiefs, bring the captives here to the coast, and then those captives to be exported. Most of them going into these massive sugar producing areas. Life for the captives was disastrous from the get-go. They'd be loaded into massive slave ships for the journey across the Atlantic. This leg that would take these captives, these slaves from Africa to the New World is called the Middle Passage. And the reason it's called the Middle Passage is because it's part of the middle leg of the triangle trade. So you've got goods like sugar going from here to Europe, goods from Europe going to here to Africa, and then this passage here. And the Middle Passage is the slave passage. Okay, these slave ships were packed full of human beings. Okay, stacked one on top of one another, like so. Those that died on the voyage over would be thrown overboard, or if you caused trouble on the voyage over, you would be thrown overboard. That's, of course, a death sentence. Okay, sugar mills were terribly, all right, dangerous for the African slaves. They were huge. They working with sugarcane was extremely difficult. So it is a very dangerous occupation, especially in these tropical environments. This is all part of something that, again, is going to come up a little bit later on. Okay, this concept of mercantilism. Okay, the Spanish are out on the forefront, the Portuguese either too, or really, but later the French and the British are going to catch up. A major change, kind of a major shift in economies is going on. And what they want to do is to improve their economies. And so many of these states early on are mercantile states. Okay, and the goals of mercantilism, pretty simple. Okay, get as much gold and silver as you can, increase your holdings of gold and silver. Okay, establish what's called a favorable balance of trade. That means you export, okay, you export more than you import. So you're sending out stuff for trade more than you're bringing in. That makes you self-reliant. And then to get colonies, because those colonies can provide you with raw materials. And they can provide you with a market. I wish I could write better with my mouse, but you get the idea. Okay, get as much gold and silver as you can, establish a favorable balance of trade, and get colonies. Okay, and so the Spanish are going to get very wealthy very fast as a result of gold and silver and other things that are going to come out of the Americas. In fact, they may get too wealthy. It may cause them to have this economic shift that they are not really prepared for. By the time you get to really, though, the end of the 1500s into really the beginnings of the 1600s, what you're going to find out is that the Spanish system and the Spanish colonial empire is in decline, and it's being replaced by the English, which is what I told you we've got to get to. So now that we've got the Spanish established here in America, and you sort of know what Spanish colonialism looks like, okay? By the way, even the Spanish established their own really colonial class system, okay? So the Peninsulares were this group that were native Spanish. Okay, they were born in Spain, but come to America to do various tasks. The Creoles were 100% Spanish blood, but were born in America. So that actually made them lower on the social ladder. Okay. Here you had the mixed races, the mestizos, which were Spanish and Native American mixtures, and the mulattoes, which were Spanish and African mixtures. Right? And then at the bottom would be the Native Americans and the slaves. The Spanish established this whole colonial system, okay? But it's on the decline by the time you get into the 1600s, and we got to figure out why. And of course, what we also have to figure out is what the English are doing. All right, that's it for the day. So look for this to be posted for your Friday lecture. You got to dig through this stuff, and then next week we're going to start talking about English colonialism, okay? All right, have a great weekend.